Hello, Alex Lafkus here. Um, I just kind of wanted to talk about some strategies and stuff for night fishing. Now, granted, night fishing is not something I do much of anymore, but I did spend a lot of time night fishing and a lot of nights out there, more time guiding it than fishing because it was always looked at as like, look, this is the easiest way to catch big fish. And so if I had people that struggled getting them on streamers or during the hex hatch, I would kind of push them towards the night fishing thing. Um, it's the most effective way to catch per hour to catch nice fish. Your biggest fish in Michigan, I'm not a firm believer in it because a lot of our areas that have the biggest fish don't night fish real well. I'm talking the big tail waters and stuff like that, and that just usually water temps all jacked up, works better for a streamer. So now, but on the White River, obviously, it's the number one producer of really truly large fish. Um, and any of the western rivers too that run cold all the time. It's how you're going to get the majority of your big ones, whether or not you want to do it. The only reason I don't do it anymore is I do not find it as enjoyable. I really enjoy the process of fishing during the daytime, seeing the spot, seeing the cast, making the cast. A lot of the night fishing thing is just the sheer dedication and going and going and going and going and going before you run into that big fish. So there's a few things to consider. As far as gear and tackle goes, I'm not a firm believer in, you know, you can run cable. We used to say even with hex, if it fits through the eye, fish it. So you want short, stiff. I still like a decent length of leader because I want the distance between the fly line and where the fly lands. So I'm still like, as far as, 8 foot, something where you can space it out a little bit. Um, the other thing I do like is I like the softer lines, like a Rio Gold, because it's going to land with less impact. And in addition, when you're fighting a fish, when you're fishing a tight line and you hook fish, if you're fishing a really aggressive forward taper, there's a lot of drag on that line in current. So I'm going to stick with a little more true diameter line instead of something that's aggressively weighted to the front. Presentations, a lot of the stuff is done down and across. It's good when they're aggressive or when they're just dumb. They'll come chase things out. But there's some ways to mix that up too. Upstream angles at a 45 to fish it through. So in that case, if you find a defined like bubble line or seam that they're going to sit in, or an inside corner, if you can throw it up and just keep it in there and hold it in there longer so the head swims down. It's similar to streamer fishing where the head of the fly is going down. That'll trigger some different bites. Sometimes if you roll one on an aggressive drift, you can do that where you go up and across. Fishing out of the boat a lot, and a lot of it had to do with who I was fishing with, whatever, just, standard client stuff. Let's make it the easiest and see what we can do. When I was wade fishing a lot and doing it on the white a lot, I was always wade fishing it. And it was, I would do the up and across, like get it at that angle so it starts coming down. The other one is that's probably the most neglected is upstream dead drift. It gets trickier. I've always had a feeling that in June when those fish are more focused on, or even into July where they're feeding in the drift more because that's what they're accustomed to. They're eating big dry flies at night, this, that, the other thing. Like a lot of the upstream dead drift stuff is critical, and you can just go through and throw that big dry. Especially if spots where big fish are rising, like you can go and hit those spots on nights without flies and catch those fish later into the evenings or after dark. Once again, not something I do a ton, but it will be effective for you. The other the other thing to really consider that determines a lot of your fishing is time of year and moon phase. Full moons are always a little trickier. It's really bright out there. If you haven't spent a night on a full moon, it's a lot. A lot of people will start picking at the shadowy pockets and stuff. One thing that is kind of a common belief in the muskie world, and I actually read an article recently about night fishing and full moons that I never really did, but it made a ton of sense, was, now this is believed in, and it correlates with what's believed in the musky world. During the full moons, you fish like you would during the day. So whether that's burning bucktails, going fast, like moving your stuff quick, because those fish can see it all. So that's what the musky guys are saying during the full moons. This article I read was a gentleman talking about the exact same thing, where he was nymphing big nymphs with glow indicators during the full moon periods, and he was catching huge fish. Because regardless of if you want to be out there, if it's the best night fishing, the moon phases are so critical for these fish, and those big fish will show up around those moon phases in a little different manner than they do just generally speaking throughout a month. You're going to see increases of when those big fish are out according to the new and the full typically. And then of course your weather patterns in between will also jump some other stuff, but it's a little less predictable, a little more got to go every night to hit it. If I'm booking days years out for any kind of fishing or a year out, I'm trying to target those specific moon phases based on what I'm doing. Unless it's saltwater, which is totally different because then the tides go crazy. So that's kind of an idea of when to target it. You're going to find it's common knowledge that as you get into mid to late August, early September, like those are the moon phases guys are really looking for. When guys like that do a ton of night guiding, like Donnie Richards or Eddie McCoy, like those are the sought after dates. And it's that late August new moon, stuff like that, early September, whatever it is, wherever it happens to fall. But in that later half, that's kind of water temps are dropping, a lot of time of not a ton of food. Like if you're booking a year in advance, that's what you would look for. Now, as far as flies go, I think that everybody falls in love with the big pusher fly, the big mouse type stuff. This is one of Russ's Softex mice. It was always great because he'd put some glow in the dark sticker on the back so when it was up in the tree, you knew where it was. This type of stuff will work. Pink, big color down in Arkansas. I don't know how many people fish it up here. This will work. I've always done better on these type of, we're going to call them waking flies, in flat water. So the flatter the water, the more the waking fly will work. People fall in love with the topwater thing. That's what they want to run. Another one that's kind of cool that if you're playing with it a little bit more aggressively are these stealth bombers, which are just a badass. I mean, it's a badass mouse fly. Or not mouse, but bass fly too. I don't know if you've tied them. There's a cutter that River Road Creation sells, but between this cup and that loop, man, you create a sweet bubble trail. So if you're fishing more aggressively, it'll give you a boom, and you'll see the bubbles kick out the back. That's a sweet fly. These are tied on Tiemco 8089. That's bass style. That's a number 2 or whatever it was. That type pusher stuff, always better in the flat water. Where I've caught big fish in Arkansas has been in the big flats, the big slow pools on that waking stuff. One thing to keep in mind in Arkansas is all of my big fish that were caught on 70, 80 foot casts. You're almost reaching that whole fly line out. Seems like the fish follows it forever and eats it, after 40, 50 feet of presentation. So they're going to follow it. That's why when you see a lot of the big fish that are caught now at night in Arkansas, there's 2 things that's really happening, and some of it happens in Michigan. One, they're throwing spinning rods because your average client can't cast it that far, so they're running whopper ploppers, jerkbait, whatever they do. But they've kind of gotten off the fly thing. The other thing is it's big time spotlight country. That was introduced to them a few years ago, where you go and find a big one and just sit on it long enough till it eats. So you're out at night with your spotlight and you find them and there you go. I've never bought into that. It's happening more and more in Michigan now too. Like that's how a lot of the big fish are caught. People go up and down the river till they find a big one, and then we'll just keep repeatedly hitting that fish until they catch it, whether it's that week, the next week, 2 months later. I always felt like the challenge of night fishing was seeing a river enough in the day to be able to put together where they're going to go at night, and the more you do it, the easier it is. It's tail outs where the back of the pool comes up a lot of times. Those big back eddies, you'll get a blow up every once in a while. They're hard to hook in there because your line's always at a weird angle. Inside corners, if you got a good corner, usually there's if there's one chunk of wood or something on that inside where it's flat, and you'll see it'll go from little choppy stuff to grease, and they're going to usually sit right on that edge on that inside corner. If there's one chunk of wood, they're usually associated with that right around the hook. Um, that was always the fun to me. I would go a lot during the day, see the spots, put it together, and then go back at night. When I was guiding heavy, I was doing mornings for brook trout and at night for night fishing, and I would kind of like, it was always a process of like, as I'm doing brook trout trips, looking for different spots. And a lot of the brook trout stuff, like the shelves and the riffles and stuff like that, those big browns are moving to those as well at night. So there's like a transition time. You know how you catch those brook trout out of those riffles during the day, and you get about 8:30, 9 o'clock at night, and you can't catch a brook trout. Well, that's things are shuffling now. Bigger fish are moving into those little riffle drops on the Asable or whatever river, and so that kind of changes, and you'll find those big browns there. Um, the other fly that's probably the most neglected, well, not the most neglected, but it's up there, are the pusher flies, which you got the wakers, which are going to kick the big wake, and then the pushers. These are devastating. If I had one style to choose all times, it would probably be this. Houghton Lake Blaster, old school pattern up here in Michigan, Black Zoo Cougar, both phenomenal flies. I don't do any grease or anything, and they're just going to sit below the water and just push a little wake. It's not going to ride high and create that big V. It's just going to be a little wave in front of it. This type of fly is absolutely devastating, no matter where you go, what you're doing. Um, phenomenal fly. And it's just spun flat. You can see it's not a big bulky head. You're not going to pop it. It's just a more subtle presentation that's going to work in greasy water, maybe water with a little bit more chop. But these are, put the foam away, like the mouse thing people fall in love with, but this is, you want to catch them, A lot of times they'll blow up on the mouse, and in those situations, they would have eaten something like that. Other type of stuff are like wets, like the old school Houghton Lake Special. These are tied a little smaller. That's old school style. This is a yellow one. Josh Greenberg over at Gates has fished a ton at night. He swears yellow on the quartered moons is extremely effective. I'd listen to him. He spent a lot of hours out there. I can believe it. It's kind of weird, different lighting. In the fuller moons, I've always done better on like the white, brighter stuff. The dark moons, it's always dark. It's always the blacks. He says that yellow on the quarter moon, there's really something to it. So, that quarter moon's a few day window in between, which is also a very productive musky time. So it wouldn't surprise me if those bigger browns come out then too. Now, frankly, old school, it's not overlooked, but in the new age, it's way overlooked. Dude, you want to catch them, you run a black woolhead. Black woolhead sculpins devastate fish at night. I've done really well in Arkansas on these. One of my bigger ones is like 29 and a half. Came on a black woolhead. I always, there was this spot that I was fishing with. I had Russ down there a few years ago. I mean, this is years ago, back when I night fished a little. What I found is when there's chop, the wet fly stuff is way more effective than anything else. So like you're fishing kind of riffly stuff. And down in Arkansas, there's these weird little limestone ridges that pop up in the middle of these pools, and you get like some weird chop on the top. We pulled into one of those, and I'm like, okay, I know there's got to be a big one here. Deep water, famed spot. I'm going to drop anchor up here, and we're going to sit for a minute. And you got like a 26 and a half on the black woolhead, and it was just moving it through that broken water. So I timed some these are kind of bigger. I'd probably downsize it here in Michigan a little, go down to 2 to 3 inches. You don't need a ton of motion, you don't need a ton of swim. Like you're just kind of looking for nice, steady presentation. They're feeling it with their lateral line, then they're picking up on it with their eyes. That's the thing is they're those trout have 2 different cones, and in low light they switch. So like they'll have a wide cone during the day so they can sit and see bigger areas. Well, at night that gets small. That gets narrow. That's usually if you're fishing an evening hatch and you see a little lull and there's still flies out there, that's the transition time. Well, that happens at night too. So now you're trying to draw them with their lateral line before they key in on it in that smaller cone. I don't know, just some basic principles on night fishing. Hopefully some of that stuff you can put to use here in the next month or so as we get into peak night fishing season. I just thought I'd share what I knew or learned while I was night fishing. So anyway, feel free to leave questions down in the comments. I'm good at getting back with them. or back to you through there. And like, subscribe, all that stuff helps me keep motivated. I got one of the dogs screaming for dinner, so better take, or breakfast rather. Better take care of that. Thanks.